I'd love to start off by asking you if you can share a little bit about your path to conducting. What was it that first drew you to the podium instead of or in addition to performing? Because I believe that you're also a singer, right?
That's right. Yes, I was trained as an opera singer in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm from. And I went to university in Portland, and then I went off to University of British Columbia for my master's degree in opera performance. And I worked a little bit there with Vancouver Opera. And I came back after grad school back to Portland, and I ended up spending 10 years in Portland with Portland Opera doing compromario roles and singing in the chorus and freelancing and teaching, which has led me to conducting. I never wanted to be a conductor per se. I never, I wasn't a kid that went to the symphony and was like, I want to do that. Um, it was sort of by happenstance through mentoring my voice students in recitals where we actually needed someone to accompany my students in productions. And I would put scenes together from musicals and from oratorios, and there just needed to be a conductor for those recitals. And I thought, okay, well, I can do the basics. I know where one and two and three and four are. How hard can it be? Um, and I ended up doing a sort of a mini production of The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan.
Oh, wow. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, it's a fantastic score. And I remember just feeling as I was conducting it with the musicians, with my students, feeling how natural it was for me to be
Mhm.
leading, guiding the music, even though with my hands and not with my voice this time, how natural it felt. And the musicians after the performance came up to me, the instrumentalists, and said, "Hey, you have something that I think you should look into. You're very clear, you're very musical. Maybe you should investigate conducting more as something that you do on the side of singing." And from there, I just kind of got the bug. I ended up doing a lot of musical theater, conducting after that, The Mikado. I did Chicago the musical, I did Phantom, I did Pippin, I did Anything Goes. I did a lot of musicals, and that's basically where I got my start in conducting was with musical theater.
That's amazing. It sounds like your repertoire is extremely rich. And I think, as somebody who had her start in singing, it really shaped your experience as a vocalist, really shaped and informed your approach to conducting. Certainly the choir part. How about the orchestra part? How do you feel that having a background more in voice informed your philosophy and how you conduct an orchestra?
I don't think of how I don't think of conducting an orchestra as any different than conducting a singer. I just I view an orchestra as a big choir, and I think
Mm.
of the music as having lyrics to their music. So even though if you're doing a Beethoven symphony, ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum, as a singer, I naturally go to, I insert lyrics.
Yeah.
It is the time, let's go now. I just do. And I think that sort of colors the music for the musicians who are wanting to be inspired, not just musically or intellectually, but to have like a backstory,
Yeah.
to have something to sort of like sink their teeth into dramatically. Because often rehearsals, I find maybe myself as different than other conductors is that I do think about a character or a storyline. So I'll stop the orchestra and say, hey, I think this color, this mood of a character who's like walking into the woods, and
Mhm.
he's seeing the mountains for the first time, and there's this mist over the mountains. I think it's because of my background as a singer that I am this way in rehearsals in front of an orchestra.
You've had some really great mentors, and you've gotten mentorship from renowned conductors such as Marin Alsop, Christian Masalaru. What's one important lesson or philosophy from one of these or a couple of these that stays with you most strongly?
Yeah, it depends on the teacher. Everyone is so different. Everyone has a different style. Everyone has a different way of studying a score, or how to interpret the music. But I think what has helped me the most in my score study as a conductor, which is what we do most of as conductors, we spend a lot of time alone with ourselves, in isolation, looking at
Yeah.
the music. And there are certain ways of digesting music, and there's a lot to think about as conductors. Not just the individual parts themselves. You look at an orchestral score, you have the flutes all on the top, then all the way down. You're looking at 30, 40 different stabs of
Yeah.
music, and then you have the double basses at the bottom, and sort of like trying to figure out in the mass of all of that music, what matters most. How can you learn the music in a way that you can communicate it effectively to the orchestra? So my teacher, Cristi Macalaru, who I studied with in Romania, who's now the music director of Cincinnati,
Mhm.
he was the first one to sort of tell me, there's no right or wrong way of doing it, but be curious. Always be curious. Make notes in your score of what you don't know, because
Mhm.
what you don't know perhaps will be what the musicians have questions about. The musicians won't have questions about what you know, because they will see it themselves and they will play what they see, and they will put two and two together. But it's what they don't know that you can be the most helpful. So when I'm looking at a score, I'm always making notes of, okay, um, why did Handel write a forte under this word twice, and then all of a sudden there's no dynamics on the third time he says the same word? Why is that? Well, perhaps a musician might have a question. Well, why? There's forte these two times, so you need to be ready as a conductor to respond to those whys. So I would say definitely, Christy Machalaru has informed my score study and has really saved my bacon many times, in rehearsals, when those whys and those questions come up from the orchestra.
So you really become kind of like an interpreter of the unspoken things that were not put into the score.
Exactly.
I
And,
love that.
speaking of unspoken things, I mean, like something as iconic as the Messiah, that has so many different versions and different editions and different orchestrations, different rehearsal systems, different letters and bar numbers. It always comes up in every rehearsal of the Messiah specifically. Okay, maestro, are we double dotting this or not? Are we doing this ending or not? Which version of this aria, which key, the chorus, are we doing this cut? There's so many questions that come up with the Messiah specifically, only because there's just been so many versions of it for hundreds of years.
So speaking of the Messiah, when you
Yeah.
approach a landmark oratorio like this one, what are the guiding principles of your interpretation, whether it's emotionally or musically or spiritually to this music?
I would say all three. Of course, I try to go with an interpretation that I think is less confusing, more standard, I would say. So I always turn to what my mentors have taught me, which is either the Baron Rider score, if you're getting nerdy about the music, or is it the Novello score? Every interpretation will be based off of what materials you have in front of you. But I personally like to do a combination of both. So even though I'm actually conducting from the Baron Rider score, which doesn't have some of the bells and whistles that some of the Novello parts have, meaning that the Novello has a little bit more in-depth ideas of dynamics. You're going to see a lot more dynamics in the Novello scores. But there's something about the Baron Rider that is more bare bones that I like, because it's more true to how Handel had interpreted the music, and how he had performed it himself. So there was a bit of that performance practice in mind when I think about performing something of this period. So I try to do a blend of performance practice, a blend of what is more standard and what is more typical. And Also stylistically, I think about, okay, you know, maybe a soprano will really want to ornament the end of her aria, and by adding, two extra bars of melismas or whatever, which does happen. Um, no, no, not to throw a soprano under the bus, but I think that as the conductor, you have to sort of be mindful and say, well, as lovely as that is, I want to be more faithful to what Handel had in mind when he wrote this. So maybe we don't do the two bars of added filigree, and then maybe we just do one bar.
Mhm.
So things like that always come up with Handel, well, with Baroque music especially. Um, so,
As a
but
soprano, I will take the criticism. I will own it. That is very much what we would like to do. I'll leave it to Raquel because she will be performing in this production to
right.
see how many bars of, ornaments she wants to put. But it does sound like you do consider historical performance practice, whether it's the Baroque style, the tempo, the phrasing, or even the ornamentation,
Yes.
when you're considering these pieces. But from what I'm hearing you say, you're still willing to bring a modern sensibility when you're preparing this kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to because, we're not performing with period instruments and we're not performing in venues that were originally intended for the piece. We're performing in bigger spaces. So it seems kind of silly to say, oh, well, we're only going to do what Handel intended. Yeah, we're going to have a bigger orchestra and yet we're going to have a bigger hall. So I think you have to have flexibility when you say you are doing performance practice. And actually, my first ever performance of the Messiah was with the Portland Baroque Orchestra. We did chamber pieces of it during COVID, where I conducted the orchestra live. And then the singers were brought in. They listened to the recording that I made live, and then they sang on top of it because
Wow.
the singers were around the world.
Mm.
Um, and that's how we were able to do it during COVID. We had to be
Is there
creative.
a particular movement or passage in the Messiah that really resonates with you personally?
Gosh, I would say every movement resonates with me. There's not a bad note in the score. I am always moved. Honestly, the transition from the overture um into Comfort Ye, there's something that's just so moving about that I don't know, I always look forward to that tenor just standing up there and just that beautiful Comfort Ye just adds so much solace and so much hope for what
Yeah.
we're about to experience.
Oh, I think that's so beautiful. I completely agree with you.
Mhm.
So, I think every conductor has a pre-performance ritual. Do you have one, even if it's a little quirky or unexpected, before you walk up on stage?
Nothing that's unusual. I would say I'm pretty like standard. I tend to have a light lunch before I perform. I try not to eat like a heavy meal beforehand. I've learned the hard way, especially before a performance that's almost
Mhm.
2 hours, like the
Yeah.
Messiah. So I like to have enough carbs in the day just to keep my body going and my mind going. Um, so diet is important, as we
Fair
all know
enough.
as singers, right? Diet's important. And then I would say like to have a nice walk
Mhm.
around my neighborhood to get some fresh air. That also eases the nerves. And then I usually like to take my score and just do a little pass of all the pieces and just notate any tricky transitions, remind myself, okay, the soprano wants to take a little bit more time here. And I usually have little sticky notes in my score for those moments that are like, you better pay attention. So I'll review those and then it's game time. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, nutrition, going for
Yep.
a walk, reviewing your
Hmm.
material. I think you're so solid.